This is part 2 of a series where we review the article Kyle Rittenhouse, American Vigilante by Paige Williams. A link to part 1 will be in the description below. A lot of pro-Kyle people are out there crowing about this article in the New Yorker. Finally, they say, we're getting somebody who's telling the truth about Kyle. Is that the case? In part 2, we pick up with the case of Joseph Rosenbaum, American lunatic. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnnie Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnnie Walker Dread Show.
Among the crowd was an agitated bald guy in his mid-30s with a ginger goatee and an earring. He was wearing a maroon t-shirt and had brought a plastic shopping bag containing socks, underwear, and deodorant.
Well, I don't know what's in the bag, and I think she's kind of playing it kind of loose here. Until we actually have the bag and its evidence in front of us, we don't know what's in the bag. She's probably right, but okay.
The man, who suffered from bipolar disorder, had recently been charged with domestic violence and then had attempted suicide.
Here's again what actually happened. He bounced his fiancée off the ground. It was a pretty vicious attack. And she's just going to paint it as domestic violence. And of course, his problem is bipolar disorder, right? He's a nut. He is extremely violent. He has a very violent past. She's not going to mention that for quite a while.
Hours before the protest, he had been discharged from a psychiatric hospital. He apparently had wandered into the melee on the street where it was difficult to perceive anything but his rage. At the Ultimate Convenience Center, he confronted the armed men, screaming both, "Don't point no motherfucking gun at me," and "Shoot me."
Oh, wait, shoot me? No, he said something after shoot me there that she's not saying. Again, think about the readership. Okay? Yes, Joseph Rosenbaum was troubled. Yes, he had yes, he had some problems. But if you actually tell the readers what he actually said there, it changes things a little, and she's not going to do that. Keep in mind, there's plenty of really foul language throughout this article. It's not like it was censored because of that.
A man yelled, "Somebody control him." During the chaos, Rittenhouse moved down the street toward CarSource's second mechanic shop, where rioters had been smashing car windows. He crossed paths with the angry bald man, who chased him into the shop's parking area.
It was an ambush, okay? But at least she's not saying where Rosenbaum approached him, okay? We've heard that treatment in other videos, but at least she does acknowledge that Kyle was being chased by Rosenbaum.
The man now wore his t-shirt as a head wrap and face mask, leaving his torso bare. Screaming, "F*** you," he threw his plastic bag at Rittenhouse's back. Rittenhouse, holding his rifle, reached some parked cars just as a protester fired a warning shot into the sky.
A warning shot? No, that implies that you understand the motivation for the shot. You don't know if that was a warning shot. It might have been just a guy out of control firing a gun off into the air.
Rittenhouse whirled. The bald man lunged. Rittenhouse fired 4 times. The man fell in front of a Buick, wounded in the groin, back, thigh, hand, and head. The nearest bystander was Richie McGinnis, the video chief at the Daily Caller, the online publication co-founded by Tucker Carlson. McGinnis, who had been covering protests all summer, had been following the chase so closely that he had nearly been shot himself. He removed his t-shirt and knelt to compress the man's wounds. Dying, the man breathed in a horrifying growl. Rittenhouse stood over McGinnis for half a minute, Amid the sound of more gunfire, he didn't stoop to check on the injured man or offer his first aid kit.
A real fair treatment of Kyle, huh? Oh, okay. You just hang on to that thought.
Call 911, McGinnis told him. Rittenhouse called a friend instead. Sprinting out of the parking lot, he said, "I just shot somebody." Demonstrators were yelling, "What did he do? Shot someone! Cranium that boy!" Rittenhouse ran down the street toward the whirring lights of police vehicles.
By the way, according to this, Kyle ran down the street before being confronted by anybody. Keep in mind, in reality, that's not what happened. It was clear that people were coming after him, and that's why he left the scene. There is no doubt that Kyle ran because he faced a threat.
To those who had heard only the gunfire and the shouting, he must have resembled a mass shooter. They tend to be heavily armed, white, and male.
Yeah, and they probably wear American flags, and they wear army green t-shirts, and they have camouflage.
A demonstrator ran up behind Rittenhouse and smacked him in the head. When Rittenhouse tripped and fell, another man executed a flying kick.
What she's going to say here is mostly accurate, but she leaves out a few things. First of all, Anthony Huber tried to kill Kyle with his skateboard before all this happened. He took a wide swipe at Kyle's head with his skateboard. The only thing was he didn't connect enough to knock Kyle out. He did give him a nasty bruise, though. Now, I will excuse Paige Williams for not mentioning this because a lot of people don't know about it. Also, this flying kick? No, the man tried to crush Kyle's skull. Let's be really clear here.
Rittenhouse fired twice from the ground and missed. Another demonstrator whacked him in the neck with the edge of a skateboard and tried to grab his rifle. Rittenhouse shot him in the heart. A third demonstrator approached with a handgun. Rittenhouse shot him in the arm, nearly blowing it off.
Yeah, we're going to gloss over a lot of things that happened there with Gage Grosskreutz. Nothing about the fact that Gage held his hands up and Kyle didn't shoot. Nothing about Gage then turning and pointing his gun towards Kyle. That's all glossed over.
He rose from the asphalt and continued toward the police lights. A man screamed, "That's what you all get, acting tough with fucking guns." Rittenhouse tried to flag down armored vehicles that were now moving toward the victims, but they passed him by, even after witnesses pointed out that he'd just shot people. Next, he approached a police cruiser, but an officer inside apparently told him, "No, go." 2 men were fatally shot. A third was maimed. Everyone involved in the shootings was white. The astonishing fact that Rittenhouse was allowed to leave the scene underscored the racial double standard that activists had sought to further expose. The police almost certainly wouldn't have let a black man pass.
Do you have any citations for that? That's a claim you're making, Miss Journalist. What is your basis for that comment?
Clips from Kenosha immediately went viral. Footage of a teenager loping around self-importantly with a gun was juxtaposed with video of the second set of shootings. In other posts, he could be seen bragging about his medical bona fides or accepting bottled water tossed from the hatch of an armored law enforcement vehicle.
What is she leaving out? Well, the fact that Kyle was walking around offering medical aid, she doesn't mention that. Instead, she talks about how he was walking around boasting about his medical credentials. Again, all the medical stuff that she brings up is painted in the most negative of terms. It's used to denigrate him. I will say, however, that she's actually being accurate here. This is how the media painted this. So I can't get on her about this.
Officers inside had offered the water just after authorities had gassed the area around CarSource, and before the shootings occurred, with one of them saying, via loudspeaker, "We appreciate you guys." Internet sleuths quickly identified Rittenhouse and revealed that he was 17 and lived with his family in an apartment in Antioch, Illinois. His social media accounts, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, showed him handling long guns, cheering for Trump in the front row at a campaign rally, and participating in a police explorers program for teenagers.
Again, think about the readership. He's a Trump fan. He likes the police. Ooh, what an evil kid. He's obviously guilty.
He ardently supported Blue Lives Matter and wore a t-shirt from 511 Tactical, gear for the most demanding missions.
My God, anybody who would wear a t-shirt from 511 Tactical? And it has a slogan about demanding missions.
The Facebook posts about the Kenosha Guard led some of the sleuths to misapprehend Rittenhouse as a militia member. He belonged to no such group. Because he lived in Illinois, people assumed that he had traveled some distance for nefarious purposes and had crossed state lines with his rifle. The Rittenhouse apartment was a mile south of the Wisconsin border, and Rittenhouse had been storing his gun in Kenosha at the house of a friend's stepfather. Rittenhouse's age led some to conclude that his mom had dropped him off at the protest. He drove himself to Kenosha.
Okay, in this case here, Paige Williams actually is being pretty fair to Kyle. She's dispelling some of the myths that have surrounded him, and that's good. And unfortunately, this is about the only thing that she has done that's really fair to Kyle. And the pro-Kyles have picked up on this and thought, oh my God, we got finally someone there to tell people that he only lived a mile from the border and that he was not a member of a militia. Wow, this is a great victory. Okay, it does help Kyle a little that some people are now going to get the truth about these instances. But overall, this is a hit piece. She's been painting Kyle as a right-wing extremist, even though she's not coming out and calling him one.
One widely shared image showed an armed, camo-clad woman captioned, "Terrorist Kyle Rittenhouse's mother." Some other lady, some other place. The day after the shootings, Ayanna Pressley, a Democratic U.S. representative from Massachusetts, tweeted that the shootings had been committed by a white supremacist domestic terrorist. This characterization stuck, even after the Anti-Defamation League scrutinized Rittenhouse's social media accounts and found no evidence of extremism.
Now, this is something that could have been discussed earlier. As it stands, it's 23 minutes into the actual video. It's important because a lot of the New Yorker readers are under the impression that he was a member of a militia. So it's good that Paige Williams is dispelling that myth. I wish he had done it a little bit sooner, though. And I really wish he hadn't spent most of the time here talking about the evils of white domestic terrorism and therefore painting Kyle indirectly as one of that ilk.
After years of deepening political polarization, Americans were primed to see whatever they wanted to see in the Kenosha clips. It was beyond question that Rittenhouse had inserted himself into a volatile situation with a gun that he was too young to legally own.
Just to be careful here, she said that he was too young to legally own it. That is true. Whether he could possess it or not, that's something that Judge Schroeder is going to be looking at over the next few months.
The footage also made clear that he'd killed and wounded people. But many liberals went further, characterizing Rittenhouse as someone who'd gone to the protest intending to harm others.
Paige, do us all a favor. Rather than simply making a statement like that, why not spend some time talking about whether Kyle really did go to the protest to do harm? There's plenty of footage. There's over an hour of footage that shows that Kyle couldn't have been going to the protest to do harm to people. And she mentions nothing about that.
This view was buttressed when another kind of video surfaced. Weeks before the shootings, Rittenhouse had been hanging out with other teenagers on the Kenosha waterfront when an argument erupted involving the younger of his two sisters, Mackenzie.
It's really good that we now know for a fact, or at least pretty certain, that the fight involved Kyle's sister. I'd always heard that rumor, but now I believe it.
Reese Granville, a rapper who happened to be cruising past with a friend, filmed the altercation with his phone.
Rapper means unemployed, and if you disagree with me, type his name in with the word rapper into YouTube and you won't find anything.
In the video, Granville and his friend could be heard debating what would happen if the police arrived. "It's all white people, boy. We black. We go into jail."
Did they go to jail? No.
When a girl started to fight with Mackenzie, Rittenhouse punched her repeatedly from behind. Bystanders broke it up by turning on Rittenhouse. "Don't put your hands on a female." Conservatives largely ignored the waterfront video.
I think the actual term was, "Don't put your hands on a bitch." She doesn't use that word. She uses female instead. And for a reason. Oh, it can't be because of the language. She's been using F-bombs throughout this article.
The protest footage had convinced them that Rittenhouse was a patriot who, after months of destructive unrest in U.S. cities, had finally put Antifa in check by bravely exercising his Second Amendment rights. Carlson, on Fox News, declared, "How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would."
Tucker has gotten a lot of grief over that comment, but I find nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's a perfectly good question. The police are doing nothing. The fire department is doing nothing. EMT is not going in to help anybody because the scenes are not secured. Nobody is doing anything. And so a 17-year-old kid, along with a bunch of other people, decide, hey, we need to step up and do something to help this community. And it's a perfectly good question to ask, why would a kid need to do that? And for some reason, Tucker has been really butchered over this. Okay, next thing she's going to talk about is Kyle's gun handling skills. This is important because he's being charged with reckless homicide. So how he handled that gun around Joseph Rosenbaum is an issue here. Plus, it plays into the hands of Kyle being only 17 years old, clearly not mature enough to handle a weapon, even though Audie Murphy was a lot younger than him. So here, this is where she can really put the screws on Kyle by bringing in national experts who can examine what Kyle was doing that night and totally butcher him. Oh my gosh, the way he's handling that rifle. It's amazing that more people weren't killed. That would have been perfect for this article. The trouble that Paige found, she can't find anybody to say that. There are plenty of experts out there on gun handling. These dudes, either one of them would have been more than happy to contribute to this article. The one on the right is Marty Hayes. He's a lawyer and a longtime firearms instructor. The one on the left is probably the preeminent firearms expert in the country, especially when used in self-defense. His name is Massad Ayub, and he's been an expert since the 1970s. He is a household name among concealed carry holders, for example. Everybody knows who Massad Ayub is. His credibility is extensive, and he has weighed in on the Kyle Rittenhouse deal. Unfortunately for Paige, he's pro-Kyle. Yes, he does discuss some of the things that Kyle did sort of wrong, but overall, he claims this was self-defense. I will play a clip from this video later when we start talking about the laws of self-defense. My only question is why didn't Paige Williams bring in people like this? Let's listen in on who she did bring in.
The glorification extended, weirdly, to Rittenhouse's street instincts.
The glorification extended weirdly to Kyle Rittenhouse's street instincts. So right away, she's going to set up the whole deal that anybody who comes along and has something good to say about how he handled that weapon must be some sort of fanatic.
Gun users praised his trigger discipline.
Gun users.
Noting that he'd fired only when attacked. A sportsman in Washington state blogged that Rittenhouse had accomplished the feat of hitting several moving targets, closing in from multiple angles, throwing things at you, kicking you in the head, and hitting you in the head.
A sportsman.
Another fan concocted a macabre Kyle drill at a shooting range.
Another fan.
On YouTube, a survivalist...
Oh, a survivalist. Well, that's a trigger.
...praised Rittenhouse's mindset during urban warfare. The worshipful tone intensified when Rittenhouse's admirers learned more about Joseph Rosenbaum.
Worshipful admirers. See, they're not bringing in any testimony that has any credibility. Oh, no. It's all from glorification and worship. And, most importantly, nobody is named. This is all stuff that she pulled off of Twitter. She went online, probably went into Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, and just pulled these comments off of social media. This is a journalist? How many people in her own town are probably bona fide firearms experts that could have weighed in on this? There are only two explanations for this. She didn't want to hear from them, or she did hear from them and didn't like what she heard.
The first man he'd killed. Rosenbaum wasn't an anti-fascist, but he'd spent more than a decade in prison for child molestation. As a boy, Rosenbaum himself was sexually abused. After the shooting, someone tried to set up a GoFundMe account related to Rosenbaum, and a user commented, "You were a predator and a piece of shit. Rest in piss."
Okay, so she found somebody who really hates Rosenbaum, who wrote something nasty about Rosenbaum. There's no credibility to that. We don't even know who it was. And keep in mind, she only mentions Rosenbaum's past raping of little boys now, not earlier. She could have mentioned this at the time when she was describing Joseph Rosenbaum wandering around Kenosha, basically trying to get in a fight with everybody he found. She didn't. She held off on that. And she buries it in this paragraph where she's denigrating Kyle's gun handling skills. This is all by design. She knows what she's doing. She's a master propagandist.
Shops began selling T-shirts that depicted Rittenhouse with his gun and bore slogans like "F around and find out." Online, memes spread. "Oh, I shot a pedophile? My bad." And people declared that Antifa types and other troublemakers deserved to get Rittenhoused. The sudden notoriety made a line in one of Rittenhouse's TikTok bios stand out. "Bruh, I'm just trying to be famous." He'd written the motto as a joke for an audience of 25.
Then why mention it?
There was more to Jacob Blake's case than the viral video revealed.
We're going to come back to Jacob Blake now. You see, we have omitted a lot of stuff about Jacob Blake because why? We didn't want to belittle the protesters' efforts. If we had brought up all these negative things about Jacob Blake early, the readers would have looked upon the acts of these protesters and rioters in a much different light. And so we split it in two. We talk first about Jacob Blake in mostly neutral terms, and that gives credence to those who are rioting and tearing Kenosha apart. The really bad stuff we'll talk about much, much later.
In 2012, police had charged him with battery and with endangering the life of a child after he had allegedly tried to choke LaQuisha Booker, and she fell while holding her baby.
Gee, I would have liked to have known this earlier when she was describing that earlier incident with LaQuisha Booker, the same person.
A son from a previous relationship. Alcohol abuse appears to be the defendant's primary problem, a court document noted.
It's not Jacob Blake's fault, it's alcoholism. Come on, be fair.
Explaining that if Blake doesn't drink, he tends not to get into trouble. In May 2020, Booker returned from a party and went to bed. According to police, she awoke to find Blake standing over her. He reached between her legs, sniffed his finger, and said, "Smells like you've been with other men." Then he left, taking her car. Booker called 911. The responding officers found Booker visibly shaken and humiliated. She said that Blake assaulted her about twice a year and that he had her keys. A felony arrest warrant was issued, charging Blake with domestic abuse and sexual assault. This warrant was active on the day of Israel's birthday party, and the officers responding to Booker's 911 call learned of it en route. The Kenosha Police Department's policy was to detain anyone wanted on a felony warrant.
Actually, it's probably arrest anybody on a felony warrant.
According to an investigation by the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Blake repeatedly refused to be detained. He told state investigators that he didn't want his sons to see him handcuffed.
Refused to be detained. I think they call that resisting arrest.
The officers tased him multiple times, but the shocks had no visible effect. Then one officer screamed, "Knife." The officers drew their guns, yelling, "Drop the knife."
Oh, we finally mentioned the knife. Yeah. Paige Williams knew about the knife earlier. Why didn't she mention it? For a reason. You got to learn how they're doing this.
By now, the neighbor was recording the confrontation. The officer nearest to Blake was Rustin Shesky, who later told investigators that he was determined not to let Blake leave and was asking himself, will we have to pursue the vehicle with a child inside of the car? Is he going to hold the child hostage?
Yeah, good questions that could have been raised earlier.
In a report summarizing the state's findings, the district attorney, Michael Gravely, said personal factors that may have contributed to a shooting. By now, the neighbor was recording the confrontation. The officer nearest to Blake was Rustin Shesky, who later told investigators that he was determined not to let Blake leave and was asking himself, will we have to pursue the vehicle with a child inside of the car? Is he going to hold the child hostage? In a report summarizing the state's findings, the district attorney, Michael Gravely, said that Shesky had fired after Blake whipped around, driving the knife towards Officer Shesky's torso. Scrutiny of the neighbor's video footage confirmed that Blake was holding a knife. The location of Blake's wounds, 4 in the lower back, 3 in the left side, corroborated Shesky's claim that Blake was hit while turning toward him. Shesky had been trained to shoot until a threat was neutralized and didn't stop firing until he saw Blake drop the knife. Advocates of criminal justice reform argue that such protocols do not make keeping a suspect alive a top priority.
Okay, so what have we heard? Jacob Blake was carrying a knife. Okay, and the evidence indicates he tried to stab the police officer. So now she's going to come in and bring in an expert to claim that, well, the cops still didn't have to shoot him. Keep in mind, this is not about Jacob Blake. This is supposed to be an article about Kyle Rittenhouse. So why is she spending so much time talking about the shooting of Jacob Blake?
Kirk Burkhalter, a law professor at NYU, told the BBC that resisting arrest happens often and does not offer carte blanche to use deadly physical force.
Oh, yeah, we had to bring in an expert to tell us that resisting arrest happens quite often. And just because somebody is resisting arrest doesn't mean that you can shoot them. Everybody knows that. No one's going to disagree with that statement. So why did we bring in this expert? Again, she's trying to paint Jacob Blake still as the victim.
Blake was hospitalized for 6 weeks. Prosecutors dropped the domestic violence charge after investigators had trouble getting Booker to cooperate. Shesky was not charged. Gravely concluded that the state could not prove the officer hadn't acted in self-defense. He also noted that in 2010, Blake had waved a knife in a slashing motion at police who had stopped a vehicle he was in.
I did not know about that, and I'm glad that Paige Williams brought that up. I'm glad she put that in there. Okay, good on her. I mean, she does some good things here in terms of bringing up facts that a lot of people didn't know about, but overall, her strategy is very clear. Jacob Blake was a victim. Therefore, the acts of the rioters is understandable. Therefore, any attempts to stop the rioters is vigilantism, And now we have white domestic terrorists, we have Nazis and all that. And oh, who was one of those? Yeah, it was Kyle Rittenhouse. That's the strategy.
These revelations meant that an incident partly captured on video had been characterized without being fully understood. But they did not change the broader truth that police shootings of Black Americans occur with appalling frequency.
If you're going to make that kind of claim, I want to see some citations. Again, you're supposed to be a journalist. You're making a claim that's your opinion. You got to back it up. And frankly, when you look at the actual statistics and the actual evidence, that claim disappears. What do you think so far? You think Kyle's getting a good shake here? Really? Okay. In the comments below, tell me why. We'll have more to say about Kyle and the rest of this article in future installments. Until then, like my video, subscribe to my channel.